Drop the back to the poor, sell a store more and more to our company store.
Introducing myself, my name's Jeff Kurtz. I started railroading back in 1974. My grandfather was a Santa Fe conductor for 32 years. My dad was a locomotive engineer for the Santa Fe for 37 years. And I completed my service in 2014 after a little over 40 years. And in that time, I was a union member, or I was a union officer most of that time. And the last few years between 2004 and 2014, I was the Iowa State Legislative Board Chairman for the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, part of the Teamsters. I took care of legislative and safety issues here in the state of Iowa. And I actually served as a vice chairman on our national board too. It was called a National Association of State Legislative Board Chairmen. I served on that for about 3 years. I was president of our local for 8 years. And like I said, I pretty much was a union officer and safety advocate my whole career on the railroad. And since I retired, I'm kind of like the good doctor here. I tried to stay retired, and I keep getting drugged back into this. Over the last 10 years, I have testified at the Department of Labor over safety issues and whistleblower issues. I served as state representative from this area from 2018 to 2020. And I kind of got drawn into this by Railroad Workers United asked me to do a show with Max Alvarez with the Real News Network. And since then, Max and I have become pretty good friends. So, and just as a way of prefacing this whole presentation that I've got, I want you to keep these statistics in mind. Railroad workers, whether they be locomotive engineers like I was, a conductor, if you happen to work maintenance of way, signal, whatever, you are subject to 964 pages of the Code of Federal Regulations. You are also, and with the BNSF, we had 567 pages of our General Code of Operating Rules. We had superintendent's notices that would come out periodically that we had to know. We would have general manager notices, which was notices over a bigger territory that would come out. And we would have daily bulletins that came out and orders that we would have to use to get ourselves over the roads on our trains. And all of this stuff that I just went through can change at a moment's notice. So they can call up and say, well, this rule that applied, we're changing that. You've got to follow something else. Or the speed limit that you had, now instead of 60, you're going to be going 10. And you've got to keep all this stuff, you've got to keep all this stuff straight. So I want you to keep this in mind as I go through what I'm going to go through today. What I would like to talk about is the NTSB report that came out. And when I was the state chairman here, I had to read these things all the time. The NTSB, the Federal Railroad Administration stuff I had to read, and I had to pretty well tear it apart. And what I found is I was going through this stuff is that there were always a lot of inaccuracies. There were a lot of stuff left out. It was by no means complete. I would go to our membership and tell them, you know, because I read this, so these guys didn't have to. But as I would read this to them, it, you know, it would cause questions. They would want to know, well, you know, what are you doing about the fact that this stuff is not accurate and this does not exactly portray what's going on the railroad? And I'd say, you know, I'm trying to call these people out on this stuff. When we'd go to national meetings, in fact, I can remember one after the Chatsworth, California accident that killed, I think it was 24, 25 people. It was a passenger train got into a freight train. I was able to ask the first question, and we had one of the vice chairmen for the NTSB at our meeting, and my question to him was, if there would have been another person on the head end of the passenger train that ran into the freight train, don't you think that would have made a difference? And this guy turned this around to somebody being on a cell phone while his daughter was on a train. And right about that time, I'm going off like a skyrocket, because this guy is, what he's trying to do is dodge the question. And I've got people trying to pull me down and everything, but apparently it triggered a lot. A good friend of mine was one of the lead investigators. And this happened in East Palestine too. The organizations, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, were part of this investigation, along with smart sheet metal workers who represent conductors. They were a party. BMWED, the maintenance of way workers, were a party. I think signal maintainers. There were several different unions, because there's 13 different unions in rail that represent rail workers, and that's why it's really hard to get things done. But a lot of times these investigators just ignore what we have to say. And Chatsworth, what we found out, because it was our Oregon State chairman who was the lead for the BLET in that investigation, he stood up, and it was like 2 or 3 people after me, and he just started lambasting this guy. He says, I told you people, he said, I had 4 witnesses that saw the signal that passenger train took, and they said that it was a green signal, which is a all clear proceed signal. And he said, you ignored that. And this guy said, well, we ignored that because of the fact that I had an ophthalmologist tell me that you couldn't correctly discern the color of a signal from that far away. There is 50 promoted engineers in that room that just let out a gasp, because we do that. I mean, we do that every day that we go to work. We see signals from a mile off. If it's at night, you can see them from 6-7 miles off if it's flat. So for him to say that, and for him to ignore what this guy tried to tell him, told us everything. That these investigations, and I said this and I'll say it today, that these investigations, especially with the NTSB, they come in with their conclusion and they work backwards from that. And I'm saying that's probably what they did in East Palestine too. The abstract came out first on this report, and I think it was like 13 pages. And I read the abstract, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is not good. I mean, just the whole thing looks shoddy. But I know that the NTSB report itself is going to be a lot bigger than 13 pages, and it was 212 pages. So I thought, well, before I make any judgment, I want to see the whole thing come out. And so the 212 pages came out, and it was worse than the abstract. And so I will I will go through some of the stuff that I saw in the report. This will be the locomotive. And there's 2 locomotives on the head end of this train. And they're hooked together with what they call an MU cable. And what that does is lets the lead locomotive control the speed, the braking, and everything else for the second locomotive. And it didn't say in the report, but I'm going to be generous and say that these locomotives were probably somewhere between 4,000 and 4,400 horsepower apiece. So you've got anywhere between 8,000 and 8,800 horsepower on the head end. Behind that, you're going to have 100 and I think it's 21 cars. So I will not draw 121 cars if you don't mind.
Why not? Oh, come on, bro.
Okay. No. So anyway, you've got 121 cars. We'll just call that 121 cars. In between each car is a coupling mechanism. And the whole mechanism together is called a drawbar. It holds the knuckles, which I don't know, if you look between a car, they're kind of like this. And when you run them into each other, they couple up like that. So you've got 121 of those back there. In between the couplings, you have what we call air hoses. That controls your braking power on each car. So in between these 121 cars, you've got 90 pounds of compressed air shooting through the whole system. And what that does, and I've seen this, they talk about the Civil War braking system, and a lot of that stuff is so inaccurate. This has improved a lot since the Civil War. The general principle was developed during the Civil War, but the air brake system itself is much better than it was back then. So anyway, the compressed air shoots through there, and through a series of switches and valves and things like that, it will keep the brake shoes off of all the wheels on every one of these 121 cars. So when you've got 90 pounds on there, you're rolling free. And in between every one of these cars is something that we refer to as slack. And you'll see that I don't know if they put that in the report. They'll refer to that as in-train forces, because the slack can come in and it can go out. And it can do so rather violently. It used to be, I think we used to say that for every 40 cars that you had, you would have about 1 car of slack. So on this train, you're probably talking about 200 feet of slack, which would be the, thank you, which would be the equivalent of 2/3 of a football field. So you've got that much room where these cars are, I've heard it described as a big slinky, and it would be a slinky if a slinky weighed 18,000 tons and could blow the crap out of you if it wrecked. So this is a little more than a slinky, but when you're an engineer, your big job is to control that slack. Now, behind these 121 cars, there was another locomotive. And that, like I said, I'm going to be generous. I'm going to say that it's 4,000, 4,400 horse, whatever. And that is controlled by the lead unit, or the lead locomotive. And the lead locomotive will control this via radio signals. So sometimes you lose continuity. And if you lose continuity, you just lose a lot of your braking power and you will lose your power. So behind that, there was another 30 cars. So that's basically what the train looks like. So when it was coming into East Palestine, from what I understand, from what I read, they said they contacted the crew and they said, you've got the hot bearing desk says you have a hot bearing 23 cars back, I believe it was. Is that where it started? 23 cars back. So they wanted these guys to stop. So, but instead of using the braking system on the cars, they used what we call the dynamic brake on the locomotives, because that saves brake shoes. It saves money. And the braking on these locomotives for these 121 cars and let me see, 121 cars and 18,000 tons was roughly 0.7 horsepower per ton. If, like I said, if I'm being generous. Using a dynamic brake with this thing going 43 miles an hour like it was, 18,000 tons going 43 miles an hour. And I talked with a couple of people this week about this, would be the equivalent braking power is if I was running this locomotive and all of a sudden I decided to stick my foot out the window and drag it in the ballast. That's about what the braking power is like. And when I saw that, I'm like, why aren't they using the air brake on the train? Well, and this is something that was never, ever mentioned in this report. They don't do that because of cost. You know, it's much more efficient and you'll have less slack action using the braking power. Because now when if they would have called this engineer and told him, look, you know, you need to stop your train, you've got a hot bearing 23 cars back. If he would have grabbed the air right away, which is what I would have done, he would start setting the brakes on each one of these cars. So as it was slowing down, it would slow down in one unit, because that's ideally, as an engineer, you either want your slack stretched or you want it bunched. Instead, what they did, and this is probably because it's in his air brake and train handling rules, is he used the dynamic on these cars, that little bit of braking. So what happens is these cars, these 150 cars, are rolling free. I mean, the locomotives are braking, and dynamic brake, if you live near a railroad, you probably heard it whining. These things, I'm sure, were really, really whining, but they're braking. But the rest of the stuff, a train that's 9,300 feet long is going uphill and downhill at the same time. It's going around curves at a time when a lot of the train is going straight. So these cars are just going back and forth like this. And the train is not slowing down. And one thing that when I read the report, it said something about he was the engineer was going 43 miles an hour, and it looked like there was some time there between when he was called and when the derailment happened. It wasn't that he got the call and then all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. There was like a minute or two, and they know how long that was. So if he would have grabbed the air right away, he would have been either stopped and they would have never derailed, or at least slowed down so the derailment wouldn't have been near as bad. you know, it would have been a standard derailment. They bring in halters and clean stuff up and then go merrily on their way. Instead, they've got all this slack bouncing around. All of a sudden, the wheel falls off the 23rd car, and this stuff starts running into each other at 40 miles an hour. You've got 18,000 tons just all over. That's why these cars go cattywampus like they do. You know, you look at how they stack up. They stack up because these trains are so big and they're so heavy. And it's just so hard to stop them. And then you put restrictions on these guys like, hey, you can't use the air. You know, we want to save money. So use your dynamic brake. And then when something like this happens, it's like, oh God, we don't know what happened. We just have no idea. So the moral of this all is, for one thing, don't run 2 mile long trains. Don't run 3 mile long trains. You cannot control them, because even if you're not braking, what happens to these in-train forces with the slack? It's still there. So you don't take that chance. In fact, I was talking to a guy a couple of weeks ago about a train that broke in two several times, and they weren't even braking because it was 16,000 feet long, which is a little over 3 miles long that they set it up for. They should have length limits and weight restrictions on these trains. There's no reason not to. They can still make plenty of money. You know, the fact that they were using dynamic brake on this thing to save brake shoes in this derailment, for what that derailment cost them, they could have filled up the whole state of Ohio with brake shoes. But they don't look at it that way. They look at the short-term cost.
They'd rather be reactive instead of proactive.
Oh yeah. Yeah, but the thing is, the NTSB had nothing about that in this report. They had nothing about, in fact, they talked very little about the derailment themselves. It was about the tank car types and everything. And I'm thinking, you know, how tough of a tank car do you have to make that's going to survive a pileup at 40 miles an hour of a 20,000 ton train? That's just, I'm sorry, I don't get it. I just don't get it. And nobody's been able to explain it to me. And one of the things the NTSB put in here was the fact that, let me see, that it was on page 196. This was fact finding, and they don't want to place blame. I'm like, yeah, there is blame to go around. I told Steve this last night. If that engineer would have taken that train in the ditch at 70 miles an hour, he'd be in jail for the rest of his life.
Absolutely.
But now, because, oh, we don't know what happened. Well, I mean, my gosh, you know, this is a mystery to us. Nobody's going to be penalized. Somebody should be in jail, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And not only I discussed this with Max, and I think you might have been on there when I discussed this too, Chris. One of the things I'd like to see in legislation is not just a fine, because I heard a quote one time, and I have to believe it, that fines are nothing but a punishment to the poor. There should be jail time in there for people. You know, you throw Alan Shaw in jail for the next 5 years, that's gonna wake some of these CEOs up. And then I think another thing I talked about, there should be something in there about a corporate death penalty. When you're this irresponsible and you do such stupid things like this, you take that corporation over, dissolve the assets, you know, you're never going to make Chris whole. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. But he should get you know, what they're talking about with you. They should be moving that decimal point over 2 places. And not only him, but everybody in that town. And they should use the assets of the NS to do it. And they should do that instead of protecting predators like the NS. So, and another thing that came out in this, and I'm like, why? And this was, they just, they didn't comment on this. They just happened to let you know this. The engineer, I think, had 20 years of service. The conductor, I think he hired out 10 months before. And anybody that works on a railroad will tell you that it's going to take at least 2 years before you're even comfortable to go to work. This guy only had 10 months of service. He'd only been promoted like 7 months to conductor. And he had a student. On top of that, you're having a guy train somebody that needs training himself. So basically, because when I first saw this, I didn't know what the experience level of these guys were. You know, they were talking about, oh, we've got 3 guys and they head in. I said, no, you actually had 1.5, because that conductor is busy trying to train this student. Well, I didn't know that the conductor himself was a newbie. And so you put him up there with a guy that he's trying to train. You got 2 guys that don't know anything. Basic math is going to tell you 0 times 0 is 0. So that engineer is pretty much up there by himself. But, you know, they glossed that over in the report, and I'm thinking, this is, you know, the important things they just left out of here. One of their big fixes to this is putting inward facing cameras in the cab. Now, a locomotive cab is probably from this wall to maybe the end of this computer, and then about this wide. So you've got cameras all over, and I know they've got this on the BNSF now. You've got cameras on these guys 12 to 16 hours every time they go to work. With all that stuff, keep in mind everything I told you about the rules. What do you think? What do you think the chances are that if they want to get somebody in trouble and keep them from being a whistleblower, that they're going to find something wrong? Either they're going to say something or they're going to do something. I know there's times that I've been frustrated up there that, you know, one time I spent 38 hours on the head end of a train because of an ice storm. And in that time, you're going to say something or do something stupid. You are. It's just human nature. And the thing is, on this train, they had, and on every train, they've got what they call data recorders. And what these recorders do is they will let you know what throttle position you're in. There's 8 notches on a throttle. They'll be able to tell if you do use the air, how much you used, when you set it, how much you use it. If you were in dynamic, what throttle position you were in dynamic. I'm trying to think of some of the other stuff it says, but it pretty well gives any information they need about how you handle that train. So why do they need these cameras up there? And this camera is not going to prevent this accident. It's not like somebody can look up there in real time and say, hey, that guy's doing something wrong, and stop it. That's not going to happen. What they need to do is make this train safer. One of the things, and the NTSB admitted this, that Norfolk Southern in railroad parlance, you know, when I would go to conventions and stuff, talk to some of these other NS guys, they referred to themselves as the Nazi Southern. It's because of the way they enforce the rules. And one of the things that the NTSB said, and they actually said this on tape, is they said NS corporate officers were threatening them. I would love you to go to something like this, stand up and threaten people like that. You'd be in jail. But all they did was whine about it. And it's, I don't know. It makes me crazy. In Montrose, which is like 10 miles north of here, along the Mississippi River, there was, and I believe this or not, I had dealt with this 3 different times, and they dealt with it a couple more times after I retired. But they had a barge, because of some windy weather, do what they call shove in, and they shoved in to the shoreline. Unbeknownst to them, they shoved in right next to railroad tracks, and they overhung the main line out here on the what we call the K line. And so there happened to be a northbound train coming from West Quincy, Missouri, come around the curve, and there's a 20,000 ton barge fouling his main line. Well, this train, and it was a coal, thank God it was a coal train. Thank God that it wasn't a hazardous material train. But this coal train, which was, I think, somewhere around 16,000 tons, come around, they only had a couple 100 feet of warning. They threw the train in emergency, the engineer right away threw the train in emergency, but being that close and the train that heavy, it's just not gonna do much. They hit this barge at 30 miles an hour. How the crew got out of that alive, I don't know. Because they hit and somehow they went over, the locomotives landed on their side and they were skidding, and the locomotive actually filled up with ballast as they were skidding. And luckily the engineer and conductor didn't get hurt, but they're trying to regain their sentences. They had to climb out the engineer's window that was, you know, the engine's like this, so they had to climb out this way because they couldn't get out any other way. While they're trying to get their bearings so they can climb out, they hear in back of them, womp, 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 womp. They were terrified because that's coal cars that are not stopping. You know, they were going 30 miles an hour. They're not stopping, and they thought they were going to be buried under 15,000 tons of coal. And they ended up getting out of it. I'm sure that those guys got PTSD. I mean, most of us that work out on a railroad have PTSD, but I'm sure they've got it bad. I don't know if they've ever worked again. They shouldn't, because if it were me and I was coming around a curve like that, I'd want to stop every time. But that was unusual because the railroads, and I was telling Steve this last night, the general manager down in St. Louis, and the general manager is normally head of like 4 or 5 states, different terminals and everything. And he called our sheriff, Stacy Weber, up, and he said, I heard 2 union guys and a retired union guy and state legislator are coming to look at that. He said, you let them go any place they want to go, because we were on their side. We were really upset with the barge company. And our sheriff, he was treated horribly by the feds and by the barge company. And I ended up going up to Des Moines, and I talked to the Senate and House Transportation Committees about this, and I said, something needs to be done. You know, these people, the barge companies, I said, I dealt with this in the Quad Cities, and I said, I never thought it would happen here. I didn't realize they did that stuff here. But I said, I tried for years to get this stopped. I said, it needs to stop now. So I was there with the BLET state chairman and the UTU, Smart TD, state director. And I came home and I got a call from, one of the staffers that I knew pretty well, Jesse, and she said, Jeff, she says, you're absolutely right. We've got to do something. She says, nobody knows what to do. She said, could you write the letter for us? So I wrote the letter and I asked a bunch of questions and I said, work with us on this and let's make sure that this doesn't happen again. Find out where along the Mississippi and along all the other waterways here in the country, find out where this is happening and stop it. Have places where these guys can push in that they're not going to screw up railroad operations. So we did get that done. And the thing is, what people need to know, I mean, trains derail all the time. That's just one of the things that happens.
Percentage-wise.
Huh?
Percentage-wise, what
Oh,
was it?
well, I think before it was like 1,000 and now it's been bumped up to like 1,500, something like that. And when we talk about a derailment like that, there's several things that constitute a major derailment. Like I said, you derail in the yard and 50 years ago, we might derail because of a switch or something, a couple of wheels go off the ground. We put that back on the rail ourselves. And they're not going to count that as a derailment. Yeah, we didn't count those, and it used to be when I retired, like $8,000 in damage was considered a major derailment. I don't know what it is now. Like I said, I've been gone for 10 years, but it's somewhere around 1,000 a year. And my guys still call me up because they know when we do things like this, they're so afraid of the whistleblower stuff that they don't want to be seen in public. In fact, we had contacted several people about coming to this, current railroaders, and they would love to do it, but they know that BNSF will go after them if they do. So, yeah, well,
it's just blatantly wrong. Yeah.
There's a law against that. It was no, it wasn't overturned. It was
It needs to be overturned.
well, they need to shore it up, and that was in the 2007 Federal Rail Safety Act. 2007 or 2008. I'm sorry, 2008. It was a Chatsworth accident in California that all of a sudden they pushed this through, and it gave I talked to Steve about this. They gave the Department of Transportation and the Secretary of Transportation a lot of power to do something about this stuff. Nothing's getting done, and it's the railroads have captured our government, and the only thing we can do is keep bringing this to their attention. One other thing that they put on it was it was page 196 where they said that that we shouldn't criticize the NTSB report because that will make it less less potent as far as trying to get something done. Thing is, it's that they just don't want criticism is what they don't want. They don't want you to know about how trains break and all this other stuff. They just don't want that. And
No, because look at France and all these other countries.
Well,
What their railroads, what they do. I mean, they really
Well-
shut the country down. And, economically, it has an impact, but for a short-term effect, because then they have a captive audience of, oh, what do these people need?
yeah, and with the whistleblower laws, and in fact, I just sent Steve an article. Vice News did an article on this. I think it was last year, and they called me because I had a whistleblower case that I handled right before I retired. And it was a engineer on the BNSF that had turned in the trip optimizer. That's another thing that I haven't talked about. I got reports that the trip optimizer was running this train. And between Toledo and Decatur, Illinois, that trip optimizer had broke that train in half. And if you look at the couplings in between cars, the knuckles themselves are somewhere between 60 and 70 pounds of pure iron. I mean, to break something like that takes a hell of a lot of force. A drawbar that it's connected to that's in the car, that weighs about 400 pounds. And to yank one of those things out, which I've seen before, just takes tremendous force. But this train was broken in two somewhere between Toledo and Decatur, and it was the trip optimizer that did it. And the railroads are making these guys use that trip optimizer, whether they want to or not, whether it's safe or not. And if they turn that off and run that train themselves, they've got a lot to answer for. There better be a real good reason to do it. And that is solely so that they can get rid of one man up there on the head end. And I've got a story about the trip optimizer. There was a derailment just a couple of weeks ago out west, and I think it was a UP, I'm not sure. And instead of trip optimizer, they call it leader, but it's pretty much the same program. It's like a cruise control. And they had a big derailment, one of these big long trains, and I heard speculation that what happened is the trip optimizer had taken the throttle from run 8 down to idle in a second and a half, which is that's when you start getting that accordion effect and these cars start running into each other. And I'm thinking, why isn't this stuff, why isn't anything about a trip optimizer in this report? You know, if it was run by a trip optimizer and if it was torn in half a couple of 100 miles south of there, I think we should know that. And that's one of the reasons. And like I said, I have gotten screaming matches with the NTSB. I got in about a 10-minute floor fight with Deborah Hersman, who was the chair of the NTSB. It was in 2012. We were down in oh God, we were in New Orleans. That's right. And she was talking about a derailment that we had in Red Oak, Iowa, that killed 2 people. In fact, the engineer, I just talked to him 5 days before the accident. And I'd gotten a call about the accident, and one of the investigators said, you know what happened? I said, no, this is the first I heard of it. So I tried to call the president of the BLET division because he had just called me a couple of days before. I left him a message and I said, hey, Tommy, get back to me. I said, what's going on? I heard about some big accident and people getting killed. And so then I called the local chairman, who is the equivalent of a chief steward on the railroad. And I did get a hold of him and I said, Steve, I said, do you know anything about this? And he said, I heard it happen. He says, I'm in Lincoln, which was their away from home terminal. And he says, I don't know anything about this, Jeff. And so a couple hours later, I got a call. He said, it was the president of the division that was in this accident, that they ran in. It was early in the morning. They'd been up all night. They were up all night before that. And I think they had like 8 hours off, and they went to work, or 10 hours off. They went to work before they were supposed to. So the conductor, I guess her name was Patricia Hyatt. They said she was really a good conductor, but she didn't feel good. She was sick, and she thought, well, I'll get home and, I'll just take off. So she kind of wasn't with it. And it was foggy. They were going up a hill. It was 7 something in the morning. And when you're going east like that in the fog, you've got the sun just coming up, reflecting off that fog. It gets in your eyes and it makes you tired. It's just horrible. And so he went by a signal. It was a red signal. And he was coming up to this train at 22 miles an hour. And apparently he fell asleep. And he hit this thing. And it happened to be a train that had maintenance of way equipment in it. And one of the machines off the rear of this train, after he hit, came into the cab, cut him in half, and it smushed her. And because I talked to one of the investigators that was on that, he says, well, your buddy Tommy, he says, probably never knew what hit him. He said he cut him in half right away. So, and one of their fixes to this was putting inward facing cameras in the cab. So she's telling us about this and how they violated restricted speed and all this other stuff. And I'm sitting there at this meeting and I'm just getting madder and madder and madder. And I'm sitting by our New York State chairman and he looks at me and he says, what are you going to do? And I said, you just sit here and watch. And so got to be question and answer period. And I got to ask the last question. I said, Ms. Hersman, I said, the presentation you gave on restricted speed was really good. I said, but I need you to answer a question for me. I said, when I go back to Creston and I tell them that restricted speed is what killed their friends on this train in Red Oak, I said, would you help me repair my credibility? I said, because my credibility is going to be shot. I said, because everybody knows what happened. And she's shocked. And I was sitting out in the crowd and we've got all our union officials there and half of them are like, oh God, no, he's doing this again. And she says, well, Chairman Kurtz, she says, what do you think happened? And I said, everybody in this room knows what happened. He fell asleep. I said, because he got called before he should have. I said, what are we doing about fatigue? And so we got to floor fight for about 10 minutes. And I followed her out in the hall and I'm still fighting with her. And I got to give her credit. She said, if you can get information to me, she said, I will take another look at this. So I told her, I said, Ms. Hersman, as soon as I get back, as soon as the wheels hit the tarmac, I'm heading to Creston. I said, I'm calling these guys right now and I'm telling them, get everything ready for me. And we sat there for about 5 hours putting information together about short calls and rest times and stuff like that. And to her credit, she did put that in there, that fatigue was probably the leading cause of that. But it was like pulling teeth to get it done. And I had to embarrass the hell out of her and all our national union officers too. But you know, I get in these fights with the Federal Railroad Administration, the NTSB, and they just don't want to listen to us.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you too, if you could elaborate a little bit, everyone here, about how through the years and how it started, where the railroad started by attrition, by cutting things that have made these trains so much more unsafe for the train crews and for the right-of-way, communities owned right-of-way.
Well, this started back in 1985. And, you know, I was 11 years into my career by then. But that contract, we had been threatened with the Presidential Emergency Board that was just going to take everything away from us. So what happened is we signed up for them being able to get rid of people. So at the time we would have an engineer, 2 brakemen, and a conductor, and then a way car, what we call a way car, it's a caboose, on every train. And trains, you know, if you got a mile-long train, that was a pretty long train. But we didn't blow up towns. And, you know, had very few accidents. And, you know, there's many a time that we would see hot boxes. You know, we had this system where it was a rotating white light, and if the wheels were a certain temperature, they would activate that thing. And, you know, your conductor would tell you, oh, you know, you got the, you know, we got caught by the hot box detector. And so you'd go up a couple more miles. Usually the readout was 2 or 3 miles up. And so you'd stop at the readout, and it was a little analog type of thing that would tell you how many axles back that it caught you. So 1985, they got permission to start taking people off there. They got rid of the way cars, probably about 89 or 90. Then they took one brakeman away from us, and it wasn't more than a couple of months, maybe a year later, they took the other brakeman away from us. And then, so it was just me and the conductor up there. And then we had a wave of rail mergers. In fact, the Santa Fe merged with the BN back in 96. And that's when we started losing a lot of our rest time. And before that, if you needed to take time off, you just call them and say, hey, I need time off. And they kept everything well staffed. So, you know, you could take 5-6 days off if you needed to. And they had what they called an extra board to supplement you on your job. And so back around, I think it was 99, there was a ruling that they said that on taking off like that, that an arbitrator ruled against us, but she told the parties that this was not to be used as a national ruling. And then, of course, it's always cited now. It is a national ruling now. And so then in probably, must have been 2009 or 2010 is when we really, we got into this precision scheduled railroading. Yeah, we got into precision scheduled railroading about 2009, 2010. And that was to run longer trains, fewer people so that you couldn't take off. And so you've got 2 people that are just exhausted running 2-mile long trains. And then it was about the time that I quit, we started getting the trip optimizer and stuff. And then we started getting into 3-mile long trains, which are even more dangerous yet. And so that was pretty much what all that looked like. And the railroads are making a ton of money, but service, I think, what did I read? That rail traffic is down 25% from 2006. So it's so bad now that they don't, you know, it's better to ship by truck than railroad, which was always the opposite. And in fact, the Surface Transportation Board they just got a new chairman. His name's Robert Primus. He's pretty good. And he is having a meeting in September on this. And he wants to know why this is going on. The shippers are just fighting mad about this. They are really upset because their rates, you know, they have captive shippers that don't have a choice. They have to ship by rail. And they're just getting slammed as far as cost, losing cars, nothing's on time. And Primus, to his credit, he wants to know what's going on. But the STB is like the NTSB. They don't have any authority to say they're going to stop this. Supply chains directly attributed to that. I don't know how much, but there's a lot there. And in fact, I'm working with a guy out of Philadelphia. He's the CEO of the Strategic Rail Finance, and actually he's a pretty good guy. And I consulted with him on a state plan he did in Nevada, and we just got done. He asked what I thought about this plan that he had down in Mississippi, and we're talking about getting together and trying to fix this stuff. So,
I mean, the thing about it is, you're saying that they can institute measures, they have the authority. To
Oh, yeah.
Protect people, communities, and workers, but Pete Buttigieg is not doing that. So the question is, why aren't the unions demanding that he do what he should be doing? If you can't demand of the union, of the government officials who are responsible for this to do their job, who are you? That's what I would like to know.
and to that point, Steve, we have the Staggers Act that was passed in 1980 that let the railroads set their rates. But before that, the government did it. Now, after 1980, the railroads themselves could do it, but they had what they call common carrier obligations. And this is right in the bill that say that I've got XYZ Corporation here in Fort Madison. The BNSF has to serve that at a reasonable price if I tell them to do it. They don't enforce the Staggers Act either. And they left these shippers just high and dry. I mean, shippers are really upset with them. So as far as legislation, we have had legislation on the restricting the size of trains. In fact, in Iowa, before I left, it was right during COVID, we had a bill to restrict freight trains to 8,500 feet. And it was I couldn't introduce it because I was on the wrong side of the aisle. But I got a Republican friend of mine, John Thorpe, to introduce it. And he was all for this. The problem being, you've got BNSF and UP lobbying there. And I'll tell you, probably one of the ways that we can get through this is if we get money out of politics completely. That's what we need to do. So that you can't get a contribution from these people. They can't set up these $100 million PACs, things like that. You get money out of politics, you're going to get a lot more done. And I saw that in Des Moines. So, yeah, there is legislation for that, but as long as the industry has Congress by the throat, we're not going to get anything done. I don't even know where to start with this one because of the fact that whenever we come up, like as a state chairman, I would try to introduce legislation to make things safer, not just for the crews, but for the general public. What happens in the state houses is you run into what they call federal preemption. And so, you may have the best idea in the world, and this is what we were going to run into, Max, with the legislation that I had John Thorpe introduce on the Republican side. The railroads would come in and say, that's preempted. That's federal preemption. And then you don't get anything done on the federal level. So you're playing this game that, well, let's take it to the states, and you take it to the states and you get something written up and you get something ready to pass, and it's federal preemption. And so then you take it to the feds and they say, well, let's see how many states we can get to do this. And so it's like a dog chasing its tail. I'll tell you, and I would run into this. A lot of my colleagues would run into this on a state level, and it was just so frustrating. And we'd go into congressional offices and talk to people about this. And I can remember Tom Latham. He was a Republican up in central Iowa, and he was a congressman up there. And actually, Tom was a pretty good guy. And I went in to talk to him about one issue, and he says, "Oh, they would never do that, Jeff. They would never do that. And I'm like, this is what I ran into all the time. And it's a bipartisan problem. It really is. And you know, I, you talk about Democrats and Republicans. I'd like to see one party put something up there and try to pass it, even if they use the filibuster or whatever they use in the Senate. At least pass it and see who the people are that are poisoning the waters, and we could get rid of them. But they say, oh, you can't. We don't have 60 votes in the Senate. We can't do that. We run into this we ran into this on the PRO Act. They wanted to introduce this, and there were several Democratic senators that wouldn't sign on to this. And it was like, well, what are you going to do? They won't sign on to this. You put that stuff out there, let it get voted down, and then see who the people are that are standing in the way of this, and then use that against them in the next election. We've got billionaires that are really running this country. I mean, you saw that when Biden started having his problems. It wasn't the people that wanted him gone. It was the donors. That's what really made the difference. It was when the donors came in and said, hey, the money gets cut off. That's why I say money in politics, it is not good for any of us.